I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our webinar on PFAS and EPR compliance. My name is Howard Stimpson. I'm Managing Director at Earn Service Limited. That's a UK subsidiary of Earn GmbH in Germany. I'm also joined by my colleague Cecilia Dowd at Earn, as well as Ari Hatha at Enviropass, both of whom are going to be presenting the majority of the content on today's webinar. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. There will be, time permitting, opportunity to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So please just type in your questions for us under the Q&A function that you'll have on your screen. There may be some unanswered questions, but we'll look to provide our answers to you, at an appropriate opportunity after the webinar. And also there is going to be a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides available, and we'll let you know how you can access these shortly after the end of the webinar over the coming days. Okay, so today's webinar, just a very quick overview of the contents. I'll shortly be passing over to Ari and Cecilia so they can both introduce themselves, introduce Enviropass and Earn. Ari is then going to discuss how to achieve PFAS compliance and why tackling PFAS and EPR together is really of this fundamental importance. Cecilia is then going to discuss how to manage EPR obligations, what some of the challenges are, as well as what the opportunities are for improved compliance. Cecilia is finally then going to present on some of the upcoming deadlines under the new EU batteries regulation, which really these need to be on any battery producer's radar. And then finally, as I said, hopefully there will be short time for a few questions at the end that we'll be able to reply to. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Ari, who can give a present about himself and about Enviropass. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Hi everyone, thank you, Howard. I'm thrilled to be here with you today, and we're going to discuss PFAS, as you will see, and EPR. So yeah, my name is Ari. I'm a certified environmental auditor, and I have a master's degree in environment, and I dedicated my passion, my life in product compliance, and I work for this company called Enviropass.
Hello, I'm Cecilia Dowd. I work with Earn as a sales and marketing person and also in-house subject matter expert on extended producer responsibility for WEEE, batteries, packaging and textiles, not just in Europe, but also in global geographies. I have a master's degree in environment and resource management, and I really believe that in following these rules, we can actually improve our environment and also keep businesses functioning. We have also a dedicated staff across the UK as well as Germany.
And a little bit about Enviropass. So we do substances control. We verify compliance against different, substances and different regulations globally, whether it's RoHS, REACH, Prop 65, and others. We also give a training solution. So in case you need to develop your own management system to address this type of regulations, we help you via live training. We have different offers. We also implement management systems if you want to tackle ISO 14001 and other environmental management systems. The fourth department is about product life cycle, which is like the eco-design side of the obligations. And the last department, but not least, is about social compliance, fighting human trafficking, also building conflict minerals reports, for example. So we can help you with all of that. All our team is in Montreal, Canada. And today I'm going to discuss PFAS, which is a hot topic. You may already receive requests from customers. You may also see what the regulations are. I don't know everything on PFAS, but I try to keep up as much as I can because there are some new announcements of regulations almost every month. But I will give you the best of my knowledge today.
Thanks, Ari. So a little bit about EARN. We are two businesses. We're a large electro-recycling facility based in Germany, and we're one of the largest facilities in Europe. We have network partners across Europe for the other countries where recycling is required. And we've recycled more than 1 million tons of WEEE in the last 30 years. We also have a consulting arm who provide services for manufacturers and electronic producers, and those who also require services for WEEE batteries, packaging, and textiles. We also do unique projects where required. We manage reporting data on behalf of our clients, and we also provide collection and recycling services for WEEE and batteries. We've been active in extended producer responsibility, also the acronym is EPR, since 2005. We have quite a few subject matter experts within the company, so we have expertise not just in Europe, but also in all the geographies across the world where EPR programs are active. We are a one-stop shop for your compliance services, so we can also manage your waste at the same time because we also have all the expertise in recycling. Our recycling business also participates in research projects from time to time to help develop technologies and understanding of the process. We also have active participation in development of regulations and laws across Europe through think tanks and work groups. Our business partners are based in Germany, the Netherlands, and Spain. Just in the last few years, to give you a feeling of how quickly waste streams are growing, just from 2019 to 2023, we processed an astonishing amount of waste, more than 17.5 million kilos of WEEE. Just in 2023 alone, we processed 4,000 data reports submitted to authorities and all the different organizations that require that. We also paid just under 5,000 invoices on behalf of our clients, and this is growing. I think 2024 is going to be bigger than that. Thanks, Ari.
Thank you, Cecilia. So the agenda today on PFAS, first of all, we are going to discuss what are PFAS, where do we find them in electronics, because I believe most of you, if not all of you, are in the electronics industry, how PFAS are currently controlled, and what is coming soon, very soon actually, some regulations, and how to comply. So without further ado, what are PFAS? PFAS is a short term for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's the acronym, and there are different definitions of PFAS. So actually the question of what are PFAS is a good one. You have definitions depending whether you are in Europe, in the US, or if you want to look globally. But what is in common? You need to have fluorine. So a marker is fluorine. If there is no fluorine in the molecule, for sure it's not PFAS. Now, there are some fluorine molecules that are not PFAS as well. So you need a link between fluorine and carbon, which gives you a first indication if you want to do a quick screen on a specific plastic, for example. See if you detect any fluorine, because if there is no fluorine at all, you know the plastic is PFAS free. Now, if you detect fluorine, it will be like, yeah, what type of molecule do we have? And then you will need to dig deeper. PFAS, first of all, are just fantastic. That's why we use them a lot, actually. It was all man-made type of chemical invented back in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. And it has a wide range of different applications. You see some of them here. But the bottom line is when you add PFAS, especially to plastics, it's fantastic because it will make plastic more flexible, plus resist to cracks, plus resist to temperature differences. It's also a flame retardant altogether. So you can have PFAS that do versatile applications, especially if you have outdoor type of plastics. PFAS are a good addition. But when we started assessing PFAS, we were just discarding everything that is metal, which was not exactly true because you also have PFAS in grease, some grease, some oil, to reduce frictions in screws, for example. So you need to verify that as well. Now, the drawback of PFAS is that they are also toxic, persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. Persistent, bioaccumulative, toxic for PBTs. And that's where it raises, some public concerns. What do we do? Do we need such amount of PFAS? What do we do? Should we control some applications and so forth? Reprotoxic, carcinogen, this type of very nasty type of properties. We call them forever chemicals. They're very good because they resist harsh environments for a very long time. But the problem is like they stay in the environment for very long as well. We can detect them in water, for example. If you take a strain of your air and you analyze it, there is a good chance you have PFAS. Well, to some extent, it's okay, but if it exceeds some thresholds, there are some scientists raised the alarm saying, oh, there may be a risk, for certain cancers, for example. In electronics, you see PFAS in cables, for example, and certain PFAS evolved to PFOA, which is one type of PFAS, which is massively controlled. So you see here a list of different applications where you would see PFAS. For example, PTFE is massively used, which is okay, but it could eventually be changed into PFOA, which is much more regulated. So, how PFAS are controlled? That's the question. So in Europe, we have EU REACH that controls certain PFAS, and you recognize here PFOA and others. These PFAS must be declared if you exceed 0.1% at the component level. They are so-called SVHCs for substances of very high concern. So 0.1% by weight at the component level. So you don't take your full product, you just take, every component on your bill of materials. If you would exceed 0.1%, that's okay, as long as you report it via a database, which is the SCIP database, which is online database. There is also, there are actually two restrictions of PFAS as well under EU REACH with the under the Annex 17. So I'm giving you an example here, which is the entry 68. This type of, it's a subfamily of PFAS. It's not all PFAS, but this subfamily of PFAS is pretty much, prohibited in so-called articles, which are your, products, basically. There is also an announcement. Actually, there is another entry with coming restriction of other PFAS, but that would be in 2026 and only in textiles. So it shouldn't affect too many of your products unless you have textile applications. Still in Europe, we have the POP, persistent organic pollutant regulation, that also addresses two PFAS with thresholds in various applications. And you see PFOA, PFOS, they are the most, I would say, restricted chemicals at this stage. Same thing in California. Proposition 65, you see PFOA, PFOS, plus another one. These PFAS, if you have them, there is no exposure threshold. So it's not like the 0.1% that we just discussed with REACH. If you just have them in your product, you need to report them, or there is a good chance that you have to report them. Either you are manufacturing consumer products or professional products. There would be at least good candidates for reporting. And what is coming soon? So we just discussed the current regulations, but some are coming very soon. This one in Canada, where I am actually, we would need to declare. So there is no prohibition or restrictions at this stage, but declare at the federal level if we do have over 100 kilo over the year of products containing PFAS. So it's applicable for I would say major manufacturers. If you let's say you you have a business entity in Canada and you manufacture products containing PFAS that are imported from outside of Canada, then you need to declare if you exceed 100 kilo and 1 ppm, which is kind of a low threshold for the concentration, but the volume is kind of high for this year. I should say for next year. So you see, there is an obligation to declare by January of next year, so it's coming very soon. And that would cover the entire year period of 2023, not 2024. And we will see over the years, we'll probably have to make these same reports. Maybe the volume will go lower, will be lower. In US, we have a same or very similar, I would say, obligation to declare PFAS under the Toxic Substances Control Act, but it's coming a little bit later. You see, in 2026 or January or July, and then you will need to report the PFAS contained, but you need to go back from 2011, believe it or not. So you need to contact and your supply chain and verify, well, do you have any imported PFAS from outside of the US, or do you manufacture PFAS yourself? Then you need to declare to the best of your knowledge since that period of time. And there are also announced regulations in, for example, in Australia, to ban certain PFAS at 25 part per billion. B, it's a B, not M, not part per millions. BBB, very low threshold. In Europe, there is also this push to have a regulation also with the same threshold. My hunch is that there will be some exemptions, but future will tell. In Canada, same thing. There is proposition to restrict a certain PFAS at 1 ppm from next year. It's probably going to be pushed for following years. We will see, but you need to keep an eye on that. By the way, Enviropass, we have a newsletter. Feel free to register to our newsletter. We will tell you what are the regulations that are actually in force with the deadlines. So that's something you may want to keep an eye on. In the US, at the state level, there are also different regulations. We have a page on that on our website, getenviropass.com, where you can see we have tables. We want to keep up with that. Different states want to, just get rid of PFAS, or they have some exemptions or certain products, consumer products, etc., in different applications. So that's something you may want to look at. They don't affect too much the electronic industry so far, but there are some announcements toward that direction. Now you see all of these current regulations, coming regulations looming, and the question is how to comply, what you are going to do. And basically what I'm going to show you here is a general comment for any product environmental regulations. You have two options. Either you test physically, like you do, you come to our lab in Montreal, or you send your products and we will be happy to test everything. But it's gonna cost you maybe a little bit too expensive. Plus you don't have like a commitment from your supply chain saying, yeah, we commit to keep complying. So you just test one sample, but there is no guarantee that it's gonna be compliant. So the other options is to do documentary review first. Like you gather as much information as possible from your supply chain, also from the risks where, for example, PFAS may be in your products. You address the risks first, the high risk first, and then you do a risk assessment. And based on the outcome of your risk assessment, you will know what you want to analyze. What type of materials you absolutely need to, get a test report because of lack of documentary information. It should be your suppliers doing the test, by the way. But if they don't, you're stuck with a specific supplier, they don't want to do any testing, then you may want to undergo and to do that. And we can help you with, I would say, the 240 main PFAS. At this stage, I think it's paramount crucial to educate your supply chain as much as possible, because I see some suppliers that are not very aware that what is coming is a declaration in Canada and the US, and they're like, oh, either they lie, they just say, hey, we don't have any PFAS, or they just don't answer because they know they have PFAS, and they think that it's something that they shouldn't declare, which is not the case. Declare what you have. So it's important to educate your supply chain to make them more comfortable at this stage, unless maybe for PFOA in certain applications, but other than that, especially in North America, it's more a matter of declaring what we have, nothing else so far. If you have full material disclosures from certain suppliers, it's good, a good way of self-verifying the presence of PFAS in one way, and eventually analyze certain materials where you would suspect PFAS because of the properties of the materials, for example. I give you here some resources, and as Howard mentioned, you will have the slides, so don't hesitate to click on the different links and do some research. There is this guide, the PFAS guide, which is, I find, very interesting. You have a lot of details on the different PFAS and the where used, so feel free to use it to do your risk assessments. And that's all for me, so over to you, Cecilia.
Thanks very much, Ari. Okay, so we begin to see, why are we talking about extended producer responsibility in the same subject matter? Well, there is some links between PFAS and EPR. Up until fairly recently, they've been operating under separate spheres. However, we see that the way things are going with the legislation and the requirements, that these worlds are starting to move closer together to the point where they will maybe one day collide and even overlap. There are some advantages of, if you deal with your end-of-life electronic waste through the extended producer responsibility requirements, that at the same time, you will be perhaps taking care also of your PFAS requirements. By capturing PFAS-containing products at the end of their life, rather than having them go through to landfill or to regular waste programs, you can actually contain them and keep them separate from the environment and capture some of that PFAS. It is important to keep these materials out of landfill and out of places where they can access water due to the contamination risks. You can also support future infrastructure and initiatives, because if you get experience with your extended producer responsibility now through the other programs, it's not beyond the realms of expectation that an extended producer responsibility program may be introduced in the future for PFAS. It's not definite yet, but it is actually being discussed more and more, and there are a lot of good reasons why that actually is a good idea. There are some people in the system who actually are unfairly disadvantaged by PFAS contamination, such as farmers, for example, who are carrying those costs all on their own, whereas that should be distributed across everybody who contributes to the problem, which forms some of the motivation for EPR programs. It's important that recycling technologies continue to evolve to deal with some of the more expensive and difficult to process legacy PFASs, and EPR fees might actually go towards supporting that. And also there's some benefits to being part of an extended producer responsibility program. Throughout the value chain, the costs that happen at end of life and all the regulatory requirements may inform some of the design decisions at the beginning of the lifespan to minimize those downstream costs and efforts. There's also some business market opportunities. By meeting your legal obligations, it's also something that you can do to improve your performance for environment and safety. And you can also promote this as a marketing aspect as well. So these worlds of chemical compliance, extended producer responsibility compliance, and also product group compliance are starting to get closer and closer to the point where the same supply chain actors carry obligations for all three. So there is some merits to cooperating between the different industries and sectors. Traditionally, PFAS containing products we know end up in landfill where they can make their way into water, into drinking water, and then into the environment where they affect animals. If they go through to incinerators, sometimes these become aerosolized where they can be breathed in by us and other living creatures. The alternative is if you capture these products in recycling, it minimizes their impact on the environment where you can actually control that a lot more. PFAS, as you all know, is something that's been discussed more and more, but it's really creeping into the mainstream media as well, to the point where people who don't really have much to do with this world are much more knowledgeable and talking about these subjects. This is not going to change. This is just going to increase. So what is extended producer responsibility? For those of you who know about this, please forgive the review for those who don't. It really came about because of what's called the polluter pays principle. Those who contribute to the problem should help actually fix the problem. So anybody who is producing products that are required by law to be collected at end of life, pay for that. So recycling also has some positive benefits where you can actually refine and recapture some of the really valuable minerals that are embedded in those products. And we know that secondary raw materials actually have a lower carbon footprint than primary raw materials. And you may actually be able to include this in some of your CSRD reporting and claim it as carbon credits. This is going to be a new sector for this area. There are some fairly basic steps that typically follow with all EPR programs, no matter which waste stream. Typically, there's a registration required in a setup phase. There's finance of all of the end-of-life waste management, which includes collection, transport, take-back, as well as recycling. There are regular reporting requirements. Sometimes they are quarterly, sometimes annually, but they're sometimes monthly as well. And in addition, there is sometimes a separate required annual reporting plus audits. There is often a requirement to appoint an authorized representative if you are selling into a country where you do not have an entity selling from that country in particular. And that's an important paperwork step that you have to do. You're also required to communicate to your end users various steps about their role in capturing electronic waste, as well as you must be transparent in the EPR costs. And we're seeing in the example we will give you that this is actually increasing. It's also a requirement to actually make safety and recycling instructions for recycling facilities. Sorry, I was trying to change the slide. There we go. So managing EPR can be quite a complicated exercise for companies. It's very niche. It actually transforms across many different departments and different roles, and has been doing this for 30 years, and this is all we do, and sometimes we feel overwhelmed by it. The complexities of it affect internal and external stakeholders. It can cost a lot of time, it can cost a lot of money, it can be very confusing and requires very specialized knowledge. The external stakeholders, there's quite a few different ones, and they all have their quirks and requirements. Some of them are not very flexible as well, and it takes a certain amount of specialized expertise and knowledge to deal with them. As far as internal stakeholders go, we've done some internal research, and it was astonishing to see just how many different departments within one organization can sometimes touch on this subject matter. And trying to hire somebody who actually has experience in all these different areas, it's like looking for a unicorn. They do exist, but they're very rare. Sorry, this is not behaving. Okay. This is where Erin comes in to take some of that burden from you. So as a manufacturer or importer, you have various obligations that are required of you. In the supply chain, sometimes it's the manufacturer, sometimes it's the importer, and sometimes it's the distributor, and sometimes it's all of them. The products that are in scope that we can help you with are waste electronics, batteries, and packaging. And now we've just added textiles to that because that is now increasing as well, which is a big overlap as well for PFAS because textiles and PFAS do intersect. The main sections there of registration involve various different steps. It's very important to have your data in order. You're already perhaps reporting for PFAS. Well, this is going to be a different type of reporting, but it'll also require setting up systems and understanding your own products with certain different metrics that you may not have already gathered. It involves a lot of interaction with government authorities and their bodies that they have appointed for this. The take back and recycling is different depending on whether you're what's called a B2C or B2B customer. So if you're a B2C, you're selling directly to household end users, and there are rules that are specific to that across Europe. And if you're a B2B, business to business, there are sometimes different rules for those and different requirements for collection and recycling. There's different systems for both as well. Sometimes it's possible to operate your own one, but for B2C particularly, it's very unusual. And B2B, it's very common to do self-recycling, but you must also do a whole lot of other steps to set that up correctly to be full compliance. The ongoing data reporting is also quite complicated. Some countries are simpler than others. Others require multiple days just to do the single report. So this is where EARN can help you with all of this. So what's good if you comply? So by being EPR compliant, you're not breaking the law, which is always a great thing. So if you want to keep selling and you don't want to get fined or be shamed, this is a good idea to register and pay into the system and follow all the compliance steps that are required of you by law. There are sometimes business opportunities here if you are taking on these obligations on behalf of some of your distributors, which is possible. You can sometimes negotiate arrangements for that, for costs and for contract considerations as well. Sometimes you can also look at the corporate social responsibility benefits. You may want to advertise this to your marketplace to say, we are trying to do our best to reduce our carbon footprint. You can also perhaps claim carbon credits for the recycling that you do and reduce your carbon footprint. And you can communicate all of this to your marketplace to improve your appearance. Compliance with extended producer responsibility can also support your other goals through PFAS compliance as well. By doing one, you sometimes comply with the other. So under ordinary circumstances, if you're doing it by yourself, the manufacturer must do all of these steps. If you wish to streamline it, you can instead talk to somebody like EARN, who can take this over on your behalf. And so you have one point of contact where all you need to do is contract with us and we will carry out all these steps on your behalf, pay your invoices for you, report on your behalf, and then you simply pay one invoice for us for that work. Now we're going to illustrate an example of how extended producer responsibility functions. And we're going to use this new battery regulation. If you're aware of that, there is a new battery regulation that is now currently in force, EU regulation 2023-1542. This is a new legal instrument that the EU Commission has chosen to use. Previously, they used the type of instrument called an EU directive, which had to then be transposed into national law by each EU member state, which meant that you had to comply with all the different requirements for each EU member state by country. There will be some differences across the European Union for this regulation because there is provision for EU member states to pass delegated acts and implementing acts to require specific things. But for the most part, the purpose of using a regulation means it comes into force immediately and all of the rules apply uniformly across the European Union. And the hope that this is that it harmonizes these requirements for producers and reduces your administrative burden. Something new for this is it obligates multiple parties in the value chain. The previous directive actually put most of the focus on the producer, whereas other actors in the value chain now actually also have requirements to check on different things and to be sure that they are in full compliance, and they can also be held accountable for that. This does step up on pressure on member states to make sure that they're monitoring collection rates and recycling of waste batteries. So this may actually trigger requirements for battery producers to then communicate this to their public. And we are expecting that there may be random audits as well. So this actually increases the pressure on producers to follow the rules. As I said before, the member states do actually have options to pass delegated and implementing acts if they wish on certain things. That will take some time as well. We're hoping that they don't do that because that sort of undermines the whole spirit of intention of harmonising the rules across Europe. The main thing to take home is that if you don't register, you're actually not allowed to sell. And if you are selling without registration, then you're basically taking a risk. We have had clients come to us in the past who have actually been stopped from selling in certain countries, and they are not allowed to sell until they register. And sometimes that requires back registration and back reporting, and sometimes paying a fine. That can take months. So you're going to need to ask yourself, if you're not registered, can you afford to go for months without selling product? Can your revenue streams cope with that? A lot of companies can't, so it's better to just follow the rules at the start. The old battery directive was a lot simpler. It had something like a 10th of the number of pages of the new one. Very similar requirements in terms of registration. Producers and distributors must be registered in member states separately. That will also be a requirement for the new one. Country-specific registration and reporting requirements really vary quite a lot, whereas we're hoping that with the new regulation, we'll see much more streamlined reporting, but we are anticipating there to be some small changes as well. It's a requirement to have membership in authorised producer compliance schemes for portable batteries. There's some possible changes around that in the new one. There was no requirement for authorised representation in the old batteries directive. And that's a very big change for the new one, is that if you are not already selling from the country, from an entity in that country where you're putting batteries onto the market, you must appoint an authorised representative. So that's going to be a very big increase in the administrative requirements and some costs as well. There are going to be increased requirements for reporting and labelling and recycling. There are also a wide range of product requirements that are new. There are a range of new different battery types to take into account of the increase in battery technologies, such as for electronic vehicles and light transport as well. So the process is fairly straightforward. There's a setup phase where you register, appoint authorised representative, and join a collection scheme if that's a requirement. Then you sometimes do forecast reporting, and then the cycle begins, and it goes into sort of an automated cycle that basically never ends. You must report what you've sold in each country. You're required to take back end-of-life batteries. It's required to be free of charge too. There are some descriptions around, depending on the type of business and your type of battery, that you may not be required to take back batteries that of the type that you don't sell, but you are not required to sell a battery to a person in order for them to return it. That's free, and they can take it to anywhere that is supposed to take it. Then you have to also report on batteries you've taken back. If you have repurposed, remanufactured, or sent for treatment for some sort of change, you have to report on that as well. And you also have to have information to your end users as well. You also have to report to the authorities on any take back you do for vehicle distributors as well. And you must also incorporate all the different types of batteries that are involved in that. Then you must also organise for collection, transport and treatment of those batteries. And this just keeps going around and around. As far as timeline goes, there are several phases. They go out to 2032, but we'll just touch on the ones that are affect the more recent years that are coming up. So it's already in force. The red little point there to say you are here. So already there are, for the products, there are performance and durability targets that you must be complying with. There's health and lifetime status. There's declaration of conformity documents that are required. You must also have identification on your batteries for different economic operators. And the different supply chain actors actually have to check on some of these things. And if they are requested by an authority to ask about that, even somebody down to a logistics operator, they must actually have this paperwork So they're going to be asking that of manufacturers. So you have to have it ready for them when they ask. And reuse, repurposing, and remanufactured provisions, this is the first time that's already been introduced. For the coming year, carbon footprint requirements begin in February, which is just around the corner. The first type of batteries that have to do that are for EV batteries. For carbon footprint for the other batteries, that is spread out over the next couple of years. And if you wish to know more about whether or not your type of battery has to do a carbon footprint and when, please reach out and we can go into it in greater depth for you by taking a look at your particular situation. As of August next year, which is again not far away, the battery directive, the original one, has actually been repealed. So it's a full transition over to the new regulation. All the EPR obligations continue to apply throughout. There's not really much of a phase over. You still have to do the same basic steps, and then the additional ones really kick in. The due diligence obligations is new. That starts in August. As I said, authors representation is new. There'll be new reporting categories for different types of chemistries of batteries that have not previously been covered in the old directive. And EPR costs are now going to be uniformly communicated to end users. So this is a separate step that wasn't required before. And in fact, some countries actually forbade it. You weren't allowed to do it. Now it's going to be a requirement. So you need to actually think about those things. You don't have long to get information up onto your websites or wherever you make batteries available for sale. So if you need help with that, please reach out to us and we can assist you with that. For the following year, labeling and marking requirements begin for other batteries, certain types of batteries, and then carbon footprint performance class requirements begin as well. 2027, this is a very big one. The battery passport begins 18th of February 2027. 2027 sounds like a long way away. It's 2 years. There's a lot of work to get done to put that in place. So if you haven't already started thinking about it, you really should probably start strategizing for that within the next year of how you're going to do it, who you're going to do it, and all the data that will be required to keep that up to date. The QR code is another really big one. That's going to be required to be printed on all batteries, and it must sometimes connect back to certain things. It will definitely intersect with the battery passport, and the two need to be connected. The battery removability requirements also have going to expand as well. So you need to take a look at the current removability of the batteries in your products to see if they comply. And if they don't, you need to talk to your design engineers to talk about what can be done to change your designs to comply with this. Because after that date, you won't be able to sell those products if they don't comply. So this is just a very high level overview. It's a pretty big topic. That was just for batteries, but we also have a lot of expertise for waste electronics and packaging, which is another whole rabbit hole on its own, and also textiles, which is very new. And if you need help on any of this, we're really happy to help you. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter. And a lot of us are very passionate about it and very knowledgeable, and it's constantly changing. So please reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you. So, does anyone have any questions? I think over to you, Howard.
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, thanks, guys. Thanks, Ari and Cecilia, for a great presentation, going through those slides. I hope everyone found it very useful and informative. Yeah, so I can see that a few questions have been put in the Q&A section. So firstly, well, this is one for Ari, I think. So question here, Ari, what is the current state of the EU PFAS restriction proposal? I don't know if that's something you can help answer. Oh, you're on mute, Ari, as well.
Yes, yeah, that's a good. Well, yeah, Cecilia, if you want to, if you have any feedbacks on that, but what I heard is, it's still under discussion. I don't think, because the initial deal was to pretty much ban PFAS at 25 ppb. I think it was just an intent to start the conversation and comments with different, stakeholders. And to date, I don't even know. I don't know if it's going to be, published next year. If it's I think there would be some amendments if we have a proposed regulation. It makes me think about something like, when we started with RoHS. If you remember at the beginning, back early in the 20s, it was like lead, mercury, cadmium, everything is pretty much banned in electronics with a threshold of 0.1%. And then exemptions appeared, in 2002. And the exemptions change over time. I think that's something similar that we will have in Europe for PFAS. There will be like a general rule with multiple exemptions and even products that will be excluded, because it's not technically doable to get rid of PFAS. I wouldn't even talk to you right now, without PFAS. And the alternative chemicals are not always easy to find, I think there are some applications that you can, like flame retardants, that you can easily find, or plasticizers, you can easily find, alternative applications, but others are more challenging. So yeah, that's where I am at this stage. And if it's only the European Union that pushes, PFAS ban, that may be difficult to enforce. Hopefully the US, maybe even China, that would be good, that they would have also some PFAS restrictions and agree on, common, from a starting point, like common restrictions, maybe on PFOA, let's say, or PFOS on certain applications.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ari. Oh, there is another question that just come in relating to PFAS. Sorry, another one for you, Ari. So for Canadian PFAS, the slide showed that the threshold was 100 kilograms. Is that weight for the PFAS itself or the mass of the overall product in which the PFAS is contained?
Good question. It's PFAS only. So you better sell a lot or use so many PFAS. Yeah, it's 100 kilo over entire year. That's the calendar year of 2023. So you need to look at your sales from, January 1st to December 31st, 2023, and have already audited your supply chain to see where are the PFAS in your designs, and do the math, do the calculation of the number of products sold in Canada, multiply it by the concentration of PFAS you have, and the weight of parts containing these PFAS. Now, if you are, that's applicable if you are based in Canada. If you are not based in Canada, let's say you're in the US, in Europe, what you will need to do is maybe declare your concentrations to your third party in Canada. Because what they are going to ask you to make their declaration, they need to know what they import and if it contains PFAS. So that's mainly maybe the concentration that you need to provide in what parts as well. And in the US, it's the same thing. You need to give the concentration and where, what is the application. But they don't have the 100 kilograms threshold in the US. So that's a big difference. But the deadline is later. But if you do the exercise, on your product, you will be able to pass both Canada and the US. Or you should be equipped. What is challenging as well with the US is the 2011. You need to start from January 1st, 2011. Some companies just went into bankruptcy. There's no way. And at that time, we didn't know that such regulation would come. So what is suggested is to perform what they call due diligence, is like you audit your supply chain and you report the information to the best of your knowledge. And if there is some testing you could do, at least for the last years, I would do that. Another thing that some companies do, they extrapolate. So they audit for the few last years, and then they extrapolate for the first years, looking at the sales and so forth. They do a kind of, conservative estimate, but it's kind of challenging. It's gonna keep us busy, both Canada and the US, I think, for the next couple of months, maybe years.
Great. Thank you, Ari. I think that answers the question beautifully. Yeah, there's a question here, one for you, Cecilia. Regarding batteries regulations, we had a look at the EU batteries regulations. Are we seeing the similar regulations, particularly around EPR for batteries, electronic products outside of Europe?
Yes, absolutely. USA and Canada have active programs, and they are expanding. Canadian one is probably, I think, a little bit more advanced in development than the US one. They operate quite differently to the way the European system functions. Yeah, like in Europe, for example, you sell one unit, you must comply. And if it's electronic, it's in scope. Whereas the same product may or may not be in scope in one state in the US, but it might be in scope in a different state in the US. And the same applies throughout Canada, and each of the Canadian provinces and territories, and also the US states and territories. They operate almost like individual countries because there's no federal oversight. So that's quite different. Singapore has a program, Hong Kong has a program, Japan has a program, South Korea has a program, South Africa has a program, New Zealand is working on theirs, Australia has one. So it depends on where you're selling and who's selling and what you're selling. It actually really operates very differently outside the European Union. And also, it's not just electronics and batteries. Packaging is now going to be in scope in the US, like it's already started. There's several states that have got on top of that. Canada's expanding their packaging program, and now California has a new law for textile compliance, and New York's got one going as well, and there's a few other states who are following suit. Batteries are really different. They operate very, very differently even from the electronics across the US, depending on what you're selling, how you're selling it, and who you're selling it to, what volumes you're selling, what chemistry. It's really different. It's literally got to look at as each state as though it's its own country. So it can take a lot of time and effort to do that on your own. Hope that answers the question.
Yep, perfectly. Thanks, Cecilia.
Sure.
Don't pause for breath though, Cecilia, because there's another question on EPR as well. Yeah,
Okay.
so a question here regarding EPR schemes. Do they penalise particular products? So I think this is probably around a question around an eco-modulation of fees. So are they charging higher fees for products, for example, that might contain non-essential PFAS or maybe hard to recycle? Is there any evidence we're seeing of that now?
There is actually, yeah, and it's very country specific too. I think packaging is a good example of that. There are some countries, the Nordics are a little bit more developed than some of the other countries and that, but the others are following suit pretty quickly. If you sell packaging, for example, that is more complex. So if you've got like cardboard bonded with some kind of other material on the top, and we know that PFAS is phasing out in packaging, but it's still present, you will pay more per kilo for that material than you would if it was just a more basic, easier to recycle. If you're using black plastics, for example, it's much harder for the machinery to actually detect those. So it costs more to recycle those. Yeah, and we see price differences actually depending on the size of some of the electronic products. And it depends on the nature of the product and what it's used for and where it goes. Canada's pricing is really different actually. It really varies quite a lot in some cases. A lot of it's similar, but then you see some very big differences per unit sold, particularly of larger equipment. You might, one province, you might pay 22 Canadian dollars per item you sell, and another one it's 42, another one's 15. The European costs vary enormously, actually. Some of the southern states are quite expensive, and some of the northern ones have flat fees. So they're all different. It really depends on what you're selling. I know that's not very satisfying. It's difficult to calculate. You really have to look at it as a case by case.
No, I think that answers the question again beautifully, Cecilia. So yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers.